Ever driven anything bigger than a Honda Civic? Sergeant Murphy's question dripped with condescension as Rebecca Torres stood beside the massive M1A2 Abrams tank. The entire motor pool snickered. This recruit looked like she belonged behind a desk, not behind the controls of America's most advanced battle tank. But when Rebecca smiled and asked if she could take it for a spin, Murphy decided to let the machine itself teach her about reality. What happened next would shatter every assumption about who belongs in the driver's seat. This is the story of how one woman turned 68 tons of steel into poetry in motion, and why a motor pool full of hardened veterans would never look at tank warfare the same way again. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is assume you know what someone is capable of before they show you. If stories like this remind you that strength comes in unexpected forms, hit that subscribe button. There are more legends hiding in plain sight than you might imagine. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Braxton's mechanized training facility as Sergeant Tom Murphy surveyed his domain. 23 years in armored divisions and enough tank combat experience to fill a library had earned him the right to separate wheat from chaff with surgical precision. Rebecca Torres had arrived with the latest batch of recruits, her paperwork as unremarkable as her appearance. At 5 feet 2 inches and maybe 115 pounds, she looked like someone who'd taken a wrong turn on the way to administrative duties. Her file showed basic training completion, decent scores, and nothing suggesting she belonged anywhere near heavy armor. The motor pool buzzed with activity as crews performed maintenance on their assigned vehicles. M1A2 Abrams tanks sat in formation like sleeping giants, their angular armor reflecting harsh sunlight. These weren't just machines. They were apex predators of modern warfare, requiring months of specialized training to operate effectively. Murphy watched Rebecca's eyes as she took in the sight of the tanks. Most recruits showed either intimidation or overconfident bravado. Rebecca displayed neither. Instead, she studied each vehicle with the focused attention of someone cataloging familiar equipment rather than encountering military hardware for the first time. Staff Sergeant Williams approached with skepticism written across his weathered features. Rebecca Torres checked every box on his mental list of soldiers who wouldn't last a week. Other crew members had begun to notice the new arrival. Specialist Rodriguez nudged his partner, pointing toward Rebecca while making exaggerated comments about the motor pool's new secretary. Corporal Davidson joined the mockery, wondering if someone had confused recruitment paperwork with a college internship program. But Rebecca seemed oblivious to their attention. She walked slowly between the tanks, occasionally reaching out to touch armor plating or examine track systems. Her movements suggested familiarity rather than curiosity, like someone conducting an inspection rather than taking a tour. Murphy decided it was time to establish expectations. The question about Honda Civics drew expected laughter from his audience. But Rebecca's response caught him off guard. Instead of defensive anger or embarrassed retreat, she smiled with what looked suspiciously like amusement and asked if she could try driving one of the tanks. The motor pool erupted in barely contained laughter. Williams shook his head in disbelief while Rodriguez made theatrical comments about insurance liability. Even the newest crew members joined in the mockery of someone who clearly didn't understand what she was asking. Murphy saw an opportunity to deliver a memorable lesson about military hierarchy and realistic expectations. Rather than crush her dreams with words, he'd let the tank itself provide the education. He gestured grandly toward the nearest M1A2, its turret gleaming in the morning sun like a monument to American engineering superiority. The tank represented everything Rebecca supposedly couldn't handle: complex systems requiring coordination, raw power demanding respect, and a learning curve separating professionals from amateurs. Rebecca approached the tank with the same unhurried confidence she'd displayed since arrival. She walked around the vehicle once, examining track tension, checking fluid levels, running her hands along surfaces most recruits wouldn't dare touch without permission. Murphy expected her to hesitate at the commander's hatch, to show some sign of intimidation when faced with 68 tons of steel and sophisticated technology. Instead, Rebecca climbed up with fluid movements suggesting muscle memory rather than awkward exploration. The crew gathered in a loose semicircle, preparing to witness what they assumed would be an entertaining disaster. Murphy positioned himself where he could reach emergency shutdown if Rebecca managed to start the engine and immediately lose control. But as Rebecca settled into the driver's position, something shifted in the atmosphere. Her hands moved over controls with disturbing familiarity, checking systems and making adjustments suggesting advanced training rather than amateur exploration. She started the turbine engine with smooth precision that made the startup sequence look effortless. The massive tank rumbled to life under her control, its engine notes steady and controlled rather than the erratic revving Murphy expected from a nervous novice. Then Rebecca began to move. What happened next defied every assumption Murphy had made about tank operation, recruit capabilities, and the relationship between size and skill. Rebecca didn't just drive the M1A2, she made it dance. The 68-ton behemoth responded to her commands like a precision instrument. She executed turns that seemed impossibly tight for something so massive, threaded the tank between obstacles with clearances measured in inches, and demonstrated control that veteran operators struggled to achieve after months of practice. The motor pool fell silent except for the smooth rumble of the perfectly operated engine. Murphy watched in growing amazement as Rebecca performed maneuvers he'd never seen attempted, let alone successfully completed. She made the tank flow like water around obstacles, pivot with ballet-like grace, and respond to commands with mechanical precision that bordered on telepathic communication. Williams dropped his clipboard, mouth hanging open as he witnessed driving techniques that weren't taught in any manual he'd ever seen. Rodriguez stopped making jokes, his attention completely captured by a display of skill that challenged everything he thought he knew about armored vehicle operation. Rebecca brought the tank to a perfect stop exactly where she'd started, the engine settling into idle with mechanical contentment. She shut down systems in reverse order with the same fluid precision she'd demonstrated throughout the entire performance. As she climbed down from the commander's position, her expression remained as calm and unremarkable as when she'd first arrived. She thanked Murphy for the opportunity as if she'd just borrowed a pen rather than demonstrated mastery of one of the most complex weapons systems in the American arsenal. The silence stretched until Williams found his voice, asking the question everyone was thinking. Where had she learned to operate tanks like that? Her driving techniques went far beyond basic training, beyond standard military instruction, beyond anything they'd witnessed from soldiers with years of experience. Rebecca's answer was simple and devastating. She'd grown up around armored vehicles. Her father had been a tank commander, her uncle a maintenance chief, and she'd been driving tracked vehicles since she was 12 years old on the family farm that doubled as an unofficial testing ground for military contractors. But there was more. Before enlisting, Rebecca had worked as a civilian contractor for an armored vehicle manufacturer, testing prototype systems and training foreign military personnel on American equipment. She'd driven tanks in conditions and configurations most soldiers would never encounter. The revelation hit the motor pool like a physical force. They'd been so focused on her appearance, so convinced that capability correlated with size and gender, that they'd completely missed the signs of someone whose relationship with armored vehicles went deeper than mere training. Murphy felt his worldview rearranging itself as he processed the implications. Rebecca Torres wasn't just qualified to operate tanks. She was probably more skilled than anyone else on the base, including himself. Her quiet confidence hadn't been misplaced arrogance, but the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of achieving. Over the following days, Rebecca's presence transformed the motor pool's culture. Her techniques, unconventional but devastatingly effective, challenged established procedures and opened new possibilities for tank operation. She taught crew members to read their machines differently, to understand the subtle communication between operator and vehicle that separated good drivers from exceptional ones. Rebecca Torres didn't just drive a tank that day. She drove home the point that true expertise often walks quietly among us, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. If her story moved you, please hit that subscribe button. Because in a world that's quick to judge and slow to recognize, stories like Rebecca's aren't just entertainment. They're necessary reminders that legends often come disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Subscribe and help us celebrate the quiet heroes who prove every day that the only limitations that truly matter are the ones we place on ourselves.